that amount. Many a judge receives only a third or fourth of what he received while practicing at the bar. This tendency to regulate compensation by needs rather than by simple capacity is increasing, and it is wholly good. Only some can individual genius be made a benefit rather than a burden to society. It is the principle of compensation, a new law of wages. It would seem, on the contrary, to be this application of the regulator. Law is the strictest sense, but other conditions which show its real character and possibilities. These ones which society more carefully considers in estimating salaries, what are they put into the standard of life, which is appropriate to the function in question. Only here society does not so generally unite in an effort to keep down wages, quote, as in the case of the wage earner. It recognizes at least partially that to keep down, quote, the standard of life of its important servants is to keep down, quote, the quality of their services in an even greater degree. It is an increased recognition of this principle that the hope of the wage system lies. The principle is right. Men should receive according to their wholesome wants, not according to their strength. The latter is the law among swine, but the most inaudible, indubitable, satirical, formidable right we possess is the right to develop our wants, for this is the development of our life. A maximum of wholesome wants with a distribution of goods in proportion to those wants in the economic goal of society. Summary. Number 1, profit sharing is a growing and apparently feasible means of improving an industrial situation. 2, a natural development leads from profit sharing to capital sharing, a preparation for industrial democracy. 3, cooperation may be compulsory by government authority or voluntarily. Voluntarily, cooperation may distribute, that is, commercial or productive. Distributive cooperation has been especially successful in Great Britain. Productive cooperation has succeeded better in France and has had some success in the United States. Cooperation requires and tends to develop high moral qualities on the parts of cooperators. Failures are usually traceable to the lack of those qualities. The sliding scale of wages adopted by Pennsylvania iron workers and regulates wages according to the selling price of the product. Piecework in itself is just a method of paying wages, but has been liable to grave abuse. Arbitration and consolation have been helpful in adjusting differences whenever honestly tried. Differences in wages due to many causes, largely historical, all of which may be summed up under the social obstructions of the wage earners' environment. Salaries are best form of wages in the application of the principle of the standard of life. What is cooperation? Questions. How does it differ from profit sharing? What are the advantages of each system? 2. I'll stop doing numbers. What is capital? I was trying. Sharing. How does it grow out of profit sharing? What is the outcome? What are the advantages of industrial democracy? The disadvantages. Answer this thoughtfully as possible. What kinds of cooperations are there? Which is easier? Where has been the most successful? Why does cooperation so often fail? Is it likely to fail continually for these reasons? Why? What is the sliding scale? Its advantages, its disadvantages? Why is piecework fair to both parties? Why do economists and labor organizations oppose it? What is the advantage and what is the weakness of arbitration? What conditions are needed to make it a success? What is the general reason for the differences of wages in different occupations? What was Adam Smith's explanation? How far is it correct? Literature. Profit sharing between employer and employee, socialism, and the American spirit. John Hopkins University in 93, damn. Studies in historical and political science. Okay, cooperation in the United States. the state in relation to labor, the labor movement in America, interest and profits. We have considered the return, which under the present system of distribution accrues to land and labor. These, taken in the broadest sense, are the only original elements in production. Of course, land includes not only building lots and farming land, but mines and rivers and fisheries, and in short, all portions of the earth, which contribute to production, labor too. Is it to be taken quite inclusively? We now come to the third element in production, capital, which is not an original but a derivative element. Capital, like other goods, is produced, but is produced for the purpose of production in turn. We are concerned here only with the social capital, the treatment of individual capital, when it is not all the same. Time, social capital, coming later, as it is then not a factor of a production. Now, although capital is produced and not original, when it has once been produced and lodged in the hands of its owners, it acts exactly like a natural element having a power of its own, exact a return according to its own law. The return is variously known as interest, profit, and in some languages as rent, a term which we have confined to the land. Common usage sells to the return productive capital in its hands an entrepreneur profit, while interest the return to capital lent. This usage is thoroughly inaccurate, as each term partially includes the others, as well as we know two or more elements of an entirely different nature. But here, as elsewhere, is usually easier to redefine old terms than to adopt the new ones. We must. Sometimes the return to capital is called capital rent. Lent, by those of the vicious intentions. 2. What are the conditions, confessions, contradictions, outlines of economics? Therefore, notice 2 or 3 distinct ideas commonly included under profits. There is first the pure return to capital. There's first that. A return which is paid to the owner of capital who lends it without any accompanying labor or risk. This is interest. And it is obvious that it is precisely the same whether a man lends the capital or uses it himself in business. The return on the capital is interest. Whether there is any loan or not, we shall consider it under the head. Though it is usually called profit when the capital is owned by the entrepreneur, and even the older economists so consider, the second element under this name is the payment for risk. Everyone knows that the revenue from a given business varies much from year to year. Some years it is very high, and then again it's little or nothing at all, or even a loss. The return for a given year may be entirely abnormal. If the business is to succeed, the large revenue of the year must help out the small revenue of another. So from the profits of any good year must be taken to a sum to help to cover the past or future losses. This deduction from profits, quote, we call, for lack of a better word, insurance. This is exactly the right word, except that it must not be confounded with fire insurance, etc. Car, house, I'll add it for them, in which a policy is taken out and a definite premium paid. A third element in what is commonly called profits is really counterbalanced by wear and tear. Shit, yeah, fuck yeah. The capital used has lost in the value, of course. The loss must be made good by a fund for the replacement of capital, but the analysis may be carried still further, and for practical purposes it is at time carried further. The entrepreneur may be paid a salary or allow himself a salary as wages. Superintendents, this is then a fourth element. The fifth element is the entrepreneur's profit, a profit due to wisdom and productiveness. This management, this we shall call pure profit. Sometimes 4 and 5 are classed together as pure profit. It is not, strictly speaking, a return upon capital as such, but it is considered here become its conventionally included, induced under profit. The vague term profit means that these are 5 elements we may better designate as gross profit. Have then gross profit. Replacement. Insurance, interest, wages of superintendents, pure profit. Not superseded, but these are the 5: replacement, insurance, interest, wages of superintendents, and pure profit. These 5 elements are perfectly distinguished in this book, in the book. Keeping of many large business concerns and in such establishments, the first 3 are at least kept distinct from 4 and 5. If no separate account is kept for wages of superintendents, the first 2 obviously are not profit in any true sense. They represent no permanent productive increase. We shall therefore consider only interest and pure profit, as the wages of superintendents would fall under wages of salaries. Interest. This is the real return to capital. By what law is the amount determined? Question. This question has been as much discussed as any question in economics, and it is still a question which to many appears as an unsettled problem in economics. Perhaps few would like to pronounce any one of the various theories under discussion a perfect explanation. The ancients in general denied the interest rested on any justifiable law. Aristotle thought it unjust, and Cicero classed it with murder. Throughout the Middle Ages, it was both condemned by the church and prohibited by law. Nevertheless, it is continued to be a custom wherever commerce was developed, and with the industrial awakening by the modern period, it was allowed of necessity. But by being allowed, it must needs be justified, and explanations and justifications offered have been various as they've been unsatisfactory. Of course, these explanations have usually Professor W. W. Falwell at the University of Minnesota, in his valuable syllable list of lectures entitled Principles of Political Economy, uses profit, quote, in the sense of gross profit, and defines it as follows. Profit is an unascertained share of distributed produce obtained by the managing capitalist for the investment of capital, services, risk, and responsibility. Concern themselves simply with loan interest, which is obviously only an outgrowth of natural interest or return on capital employed in production. This interest is what needs explanation. The earlier economists explained the laws of rent and wages and concluded that the capital and what was left, which became thus a residual product, quote. Others have concluded that the capital and land exacted returns according to fixed laws and wages was the residual product. The truth seems to be that no one on the 3 is a residual product. A return is demanded by each according to fixed laws, and if there is not an assurance of such a return, they will not join in production. The true residual product is the economic surplus, which occurs to monopoly of any sort. What is the law of interest profit? Question. Among many answers to must be considered on account of their importance before the more recent and to the present writer on the whole more satisfactory theory, namely that of Dr. von Bauwerk, is presented. Productivity. It is often said that the capital in any production is productive, and so calls for interest. Obviously, capital is productive in the sense that production is greater without capital. But does this explain interest? Without considering many minor difficulties, such as the fact that capital draws less interest as it becomes more productive, we pass at once to the fundamental difficulty of this theory. Capital does not generally produce goods like itself. It produces goods eventually which satisfy human wants. We know why these ultimate goods have value simply because they satisfy human wants. But what gives value to capital, which by very definition cannot satisfy human wants? Question. For instance, why should anyone care about a plow which one cannot eat, wear, or play with? The reason is clear, because it produces things we could eat, etc. Their value gives value to the plow. Thus, we have the principle that the value of capital is reflected value. That is, the value of means of production is derived from the product, but how much value will the plow have? Suppose this lasts 10 years, and with the produced crops worth $1,000, paying all the rent, wages, etc., $50 is left at the end of the 10 years. Now men learn to foretell these results very closely, and from their estimate of what a machine will produce, any determine its value. If it will produce a great deal, they value it very highly. If only a little, they will only give a little for it, no matter how much or little it costs. So it does not do to say that capital draws interest because it produces more than its own value, for as we have seen, it is valued accordingly to what it produces. Abstinence. It is also said that interest of wage of abstinence, as we have seen, capital is a result of a special production made possibly by saving. Men cannot have capital if they consume all the goods they get a hold of. It is said that men must be paid a certain amount to induce them to save, and this is interest. This is true in a way, but it is perhaps not the best way to state the truth. Let us return to our illustration of the plow. We are convinced that it will bring us, at the end of the 10 years, a clear surplus of goods worth $50. According to the law of reflected value, it ought valued at $50, and we ought to be willing to forego $50 worth the satisfaction in order to secure it. But as a matter of fact, we will not do so. Probably $30 worth of goods is all we will give for $50 worth of goods 10 years hence. Now to call the remaining $20 a payment for abstinence is misleading, for as a matter of fact, the abstinence involved is a motherfucking very variable thing, and often there is none at all. Besides, we do not pay for abstinence but for results. Baum-Ballwerk's theory of interest, why will not men give $50 for $50 10 years hence, risk, etc. being covered by insurance? Simply because desires the source of the value is stronger the things near for the things far away. Human experience in 1,000 lines proves this. The wants of men are like the Esau's hunger. He would rather have, that is, he values higher, a mess of pottage now than an inheritance in the future. That's relevant. Many people. Distant enjoyments are vague to men's minds, while near one are vivid and tempting. Think of this as we will. It is a universal fact. Thus it is that a man will not give present goods for future goods in like any amount. Because future goods are less valuable than present goods, $50 now is worth perhaps $50 a year hence because of inflation. I'm adding an $80 10 years hence. When we consider interest in its ethical aspects, much more can be said than the limits of the present work we will permit. It must not be supposed that an absolutely correct theoretical explanation of interest could have changed the attitude of Moses, Aristotle, Cicero, and the sages of past with respect to it. They seem to have desired certain things with which the receipt of interest was calculated to interfere. One of them was mutual helpfulness. Loans were desired in the past preceding the era of capitalistic production, chiefly to relieve distress or possibly to purchase tools for an artisan. They were not designed to increase the earnings of great entrepreneurs or capitals of industry, as is now often the case. It appears also to have been the desire of many, these wise men of the old, opportunities to gain the livelihood without personal exertion should be reduced to a minimum, and private receipt of interest undoubtedly makes it possible to enjoy an income without personal exertion. Ethically, all we have, as well as all that we are must be used to the benefit of society as considerations as whole, ourselves included. All these introduces the further. There is on the part of some an effort to make a distinguish between loans to relieve distress or to help the young start a life, and loans to be used in productive enterprises like manufactories or railways, and used to lend money with interest in cases of the first kind, but to take interest in cases of the second kind. This would seem to accord with the spirited teachings of the Bible and the other old philosophers. The rate of interest. There is a real and apparent fluctuation in the rate of interest. The apparent fluctuation is due to the inclusion of insurance, interest and profits. The interest in a single rate are familiar with the fact that loans on good security could be had at a lower rate than others. This simply means that a man who takes some risk as to getting his money back adds to the interest a premium to cover this risk. Loans for a long time are also cheaper because the lender runs less risk of having his money lie idle than if he makes frequent short loans and saves himself the trouble of reinvestment. Aside from these changes, a steadily diminution of interest occurs, like Russian words, diminution, in most civilized countries. This change, which is not due to lessen risk, marks a change in men's valuations of future goods. Present ones, being better satisfied or less clamorous, in contrast less vividly with remoter ones. Men gain confidence in the future and estimate its possibilities more justly, or at least more favorably. The lowering of interest means that men are less needy in this present or more appreciative of the future than before. Pure profits, in contrast with the routine of the systemized industry where all returns are paid out to the landlord, laborer, and capitalist and just suffice to secure their participation. We see concerns here and there which accumulate a surplus over the above of the profits of the rivals in the same lines of business. They do business under the same conditions, make the same goods, and sell to the same public as the other firms. Yet they have a surplus of profit while the others have none. Everyone knows that such things happen. Thus, the so-called merchant prince, quote, A.T. Stewart, maintained a business which distanced all competitors and which could not be maintained after his death. Not infrequently, a business depends so entirely on exceptional abilities of its surplus profit that when these abilities disappear, business relapses as its former level of ordinary returns. In other cases, the improved management is continued until rival concerns learn the secret competition lowers prices and the surplus disappears in a cheapening of economic service to society. Thus, the achievements of genius constantly tend to become an addition to social skill. But until they have become, the special abilities command a rent precisely as does special productivity in land. We may call this surplus of pure profit a brain rent, as the other is a land rent. They are governed by the same law, except the genius is not fixed in amount like land. Added to these rent-producing powers of productivity and ability is a certain element of chance. Conjuncture, which affects incalculably the result in particular cases such as accidental discovery or a mine or a process which equally enriches their lucky possessor. The outbreak of war and any combination of events fortunate for the individual fall under this head. Such elements can be enumerated and described only so far as the individual is concerned. They cannot be reduced to any assignable principle and interfere as disturbing elements with the operation of general principles. They are, however, of great importance in the distribution of wealth, making many rich and also impoverishing others. The broad social standpoint reduces chance to a minimum for irregularities counterbalance each other when we consider great masses of facts or larger areas. The poor wheat crop of one section is accompanied with an unusually large yield elsewhere, etc. Monopolies profit. We have seen that under competition, pure profits rest upon a precarious foundation. If the special abilities on which they rest are such as cannot be duplicated, they perish with the single possessor. If they can be duplicated, rival concerns are sure to duplicate them. Then, and the special advantage is lost through competition, but there are advantages entirely equivalent to these which may become the exclusive property of a concern and make competition impossible, such as the possession of those particular locations or privileges upon which a business depends, the right of way of a railway, the privilege of supplying a city with gas, electricity, water, transportation, etc. Under such circumstances, competition is usually not possible and never permanently successful. The business becomes a monopoly by its very nature, not by distinct legal privilege. The restricted power of competition over price is removed, and a surplus of over rent, wages, and interest and profit, in the true sense of the word, is now a regular result. Unless interfered with the legislation, there would seem to be nothing to prevent a monopoly asking the price it pleases. It is also a mistake, however, to suppose that a monopoly price has no economic limits, for increase of price tends to lessen consumption at its point is soon reached where an increase of price is more than compensated by a decreased sale. This point is natural limit of monopoly price and gives us the law. Monopoly price is the price which yields the greatest surplus. This will vary very much with the article. Some will bear raising the piece, much will others without serious decrease of sale. The monopoly price will rise and the monopoly surplus increase, and the wealth and willingness to spend increase in the community. Thus, that monopoly, without any effort on its own part, shares the increasing wealth of the country and absorbs a large part of it. It is for the example, among other things, the largely wealth and the greater willingness to spend freely which make monopoly the profitable in the United States than in Germany. It is to be noted that while pure profit, apart from the gains due to happy combination affairs conjuncture, is large part surplus produced by genius, and is this that far so the burden the community which tends to profit, it is naturally monopoly profit, a surplus extorted to the power of the privilege, invariably a loss to the community. Distribution of wealth comes increasingly under the influence of monopoly. The economic surplus yielded by the monopoly in the source of the many of the largest, greatest fortunes of our day, and is the prime cause of the growth of inequalities of fortune during the present century. While in general competition increases in severity, an increasing proportion of the industrial field of withdrawn from competition and falls under the control of monopoly. There is thus a growing class enjoying special economic privileges. Monopolies will be further considered in Book 3. Capital is the third factor in production. Summary: a derivative element but wholly comparable in its action to natural elements. When once produced, the return to capital is usually known as interest or profit. The total surplus left in the employer's hand after wages and rent are paid must include 1. Replacement of capital, 2. Insurance against loss, 3. Wages of the superintendents, 4. Special of capital, 5. Pure profit. Interest has been explained to do the productivity of capital and oversight of the fact that capital drives its value from what it produces. The explanation of interest as a payment for abstinence is inadequate. Interest is the result of the fact of future goods, on account of their present inaccessibility, have a lower value than present goods. The former condemnations of interest arose partly from the misconception of this nature, partly from a difference of conditions. The rate of interest tends to fall as affluence and intelligence lessen the disparagement of future wants. Pure profit is a rent, usually temporary, paid to managing ability. Monopoly profit is rent paid to advantages of opportunity, as location, privilege, etc., when exclusively controlled by individuals. What is the difference between capital and the other factors of production? Does this materially affect its operation? What is usually included under profits? Define each. How many of these elements may properly be called profit or increase of wealth? What is the productivity theory of interest? It's error. The abstinence theory, the defects, the theory of von Bauwerk. Does a man pay more value than he receives when he returns the loan with interest? Why? What two changes are there in the rate of interest? The cause of each. Why was interest once condemned? Is it always right today? Why? What is a pure profit? Why unstable? Does it become more stable? What is a monopoly profit? What are its limits? Has it connection with pure profit? What is its character as regards social welfare? Literature, capital and interest for criticism of a former interest theories and the ideal of logical and judicial criticism. Passive theory of capital by the same writer presents his own theory. Political economy, principles of political economy, philosophy of wealth. All standard works on political economy treat these topics. Consumption. Chapter 1, introductory. Consumption is correlate of production. As we said, man creates no matter new matter. He also destroys no matter. Matter constitutes things by man's activity, and sometimes without it, things acquire the power to satisfy human wants and become goods. By man's activity, and sometimes without it, goods lose their power to satisfy wants and become things. To make things into goods with a view to satisfying wants is production. To make goods into things by satisfying wants is consumption. It is easy to distinguish production from mere happenings due to human caprice on the one hand, and from the unaided workings of nature on the other hand, neither of which can be called production. But it is necessary to more than care in defining consumption. The term is one that of unfortunate class which is used loosely in ordinary speech and must made exact for scientific purposes. In the first place, consumption does not include the passage of goods back into things by the simple action of nature, such as the rotting of apples and the dying of timber, animals, etc. Such goods perish, but they are not consumed in the economic sense. A more difficult distinction is that between consumption and destruction, both them the result of activity. All difficulties are solved, however, if we keep in mind the simple fact that the satisfaction of human wants is the purpose and measure of all economic activities. Wood burned in a stove is consumed because it satisfies wants. Burned in conflagration, it is only destroyed. Moreover, a good may satisfy certain wants and still be destroyed. As when we warm a house by burning furniture, this satisfies wants, to be sure, but wants which are less than those which furniture may satisfy. If we break up a stove into old iron, we still have a good, but one farther removed from